This is Lehigh Valley Political Pulse. I'm Tom Shortell. President Donald Trump won a second term largely on his rhetoric about cracking down on illegal immigration. But his aggressive ICE tactics have fueled political unrest in California and elsewhere. Political scientist Chris Borick joins us this week to break down Trump's immigration policies, America's reactions, and what comes next. Welcome back, Chris.
Hey, thanks, Tom.
This month, Trump deployed the Marines in Los Angeles to quell protests over raids. This is an incredibly rare occurrence. You have to go back to the Rodney King riots in 1992 to find the last time the Marines were deployed or the military was deployed in civilian areas. Do Americans approve of Trump's handling of the situation?
It's a mixed bag, as we often see with public opinion. Americans are generally still positive on the president's overall approach to immigration and legal immigration. They like the idea that he's tough on the border. That border security is key. They have some support, some significant support for efforts to identify people that are here illegally who might have criminal backgrounds, and to make sure that those individuals are found and deported. Then it gets much more mixed in terms of public support for policies that might target individuals living in the country in an undocumented way who seem to be living normal, healthy lifestyles, contributing to the economy, contributing to their communities. Americans aren't very happy when those individuals are targeted for removal from the country. And so what we're seeing play out, over the summer of some of these raids, push the boundaries of where Americans are satisfied and where they're not so satisfied with the president's approach to this broader issue. And we're seeing that in the polls, where the president once had really, really strong status in terms of broader illegal immigration matters. That's come back to earth, along with a lot of his other poll numbers. And this one is one that he's always banked on, as you said, even in his campaign, and highlighted. And right now might not be at nearly as strong as it once was.
Media has reported that most protesters in Los Angeles were peaceful, but there was still plenty of destruction as some protesters rioted, destroyed vehicles. Is there a clear consensus of what Americans think about the protests themselves, or does it fall along partisan lines?
It starts to break, like we so regularly talk about, in partisan lines. You see what you want to believe. You have motivated reasoning, right? And that's channeled through our media consumption. And so if you are right-leaning and you watch a lot of Fox News or conservative media, and you're seeing highlights of violent acts that took place, and there have been some acts in these demonstrations that have turned violent, vandalism, property, some violence towards police officers and ICE officials, and you're seeing that, you're probably going to be pretty negative about the protest, positive about the president's efforts to crack down on that. But if you're seeing mostly peaceful rallies, you're seeing rallies that are largely populated like they have been, some of the major protests that have gone on this summer. And you think, well, why are we sending in Marines, which is such a rare act, as you said, and in some ways doesn't have much precedent. You start to say, isn't this an overplay of a hand? And maybe, and a lot of Americans, if you read kind of the polls, see it as inflaming a situation rather than solving a problem.
The Marines were sent in without the consent of Governor Gavin Newsom in California, which is kind of fed into that. Like, officials on the ground are saying that this is unnecessary, and yet here we are.
Well, yeah, and you think historically, right? We regularly talk about the 60s, right, with parallels to this period. That's the last time really a president has sent troops without the approval or request of a governor, and this was during the civil rights
the assassination of Dr.
Yeah,
King, a lot of the other riots that resulted from the unrest in the late
And,
60s.
and it was also largely Johnson wanted to protect civil rights marchers, right, during this period, Tom, where he said we're going to have to. The state's not going to protect these people. We have to protect them. So the federal government's use of federalizing the National Guard was largely in those cases the governors like George Wallace, they didn't want federal troops coming in on this. They was like, we don't need them, but Johnson said we did, right? And so this is it's not perfectly analogous to what's going on now, where Gavin Newsom and Mayor Karen Bass are saying, well, we got this, we got this under control, and the president says, no, you don't. So there's a little conflict there or maybe more than a little conflict, a pretty significant conflict of the federal government's intervention in state law enforcement.
We've seen other governors in other states kind of adopt the president's rhetoric. They've been calling in the National Guard preemptively in some cases. I believe that occurred in Missouri. Is this like that's we're literally talking about a police state in some of these instances here. I don't want to over exaggerate, but like that is a level where police are being readied preemptively for First Amendment issues. How comfortable are Americans with this?
The polling shows they're not all that comfortable. They like law and order, right? Americans, when you ask them, and again, as a pollster, a lot of it is about how we frame our questions and how we put context in. Americans want law and order. They don't like when things get out of control, right? But they also highly, highly value free speech and expression. That's something that polling has consistently shown Americans cherish, right? We might not know a lot about our Bill of Rights, but we know First Amendment freedom of expression. People will cite that all the time, and they'll claim that this is something that they hold dearly. And so anytime you're starting to appear to infringe upon that, you're getting into risky ground in terms of public approval and public acceptance. And I think you're seeing that wear to a degree on the president's standing, which is if, you look at the aggregate of the polls right now, as we get into summer, starting to wane a little bit. He saw a pretty significant decline early in his administration, kind of balanced out a little bit as some of the tariff stuff cooled down a little bit in May. But early summer, in June, hasn't been very good to the president. And part of that, I think, is the wear and tear that you're seeing because of people's concerns about some of these actions.
Trump critics have accused Trump of allowing ICE to adopt Gestapo-like tactics. Officers aren't wearing uniforms, identifying themselves as federal agents. They're wearing masks on raids. Is this just more of the same heightened political rhetoric that we've been seeing for the better part of a decade? Or is this really something beyond the pale?
It's an interesting question, Tom. I think it is part of this broader kind of trend that we've seen in American politics, and also how the line between kind of militarization and law enforcement and people's concerns about where these lines should be, right? How should law enforcement look, and how should it be armed, and how should it proceed in terms of its actions? This debate's been something that has played out for a while in the country, and then certainly this, the ICE raids and how they're going about those actions fall into that kind of broader discussion, I think, that we have about policing and enforcement issues, and it does play again into these broader concerns that we talk about all the time. That are layered in with partisanship, right? And how we see these things playing out. But certainly we're in a new space. The new part of this is how we're seeing these things go down throughout lots of parts of the country, right? We've had raids on places for years that had potential undocumented individuals. How we're seeing this play out now does seem a little bit different. in terms of its manner and the public reaction to it.
Are these immigration fights capturing the attention of Lehigh Valley residents the way they are in other communities? We have a significant Latino population here, but it's largely Puerto Rican, which means they're American citizens. Like I've spoken with national party officials who were like checking in on the Lehigh Valley, and on the Republican end, like they view immigration as something really strong, where they know that their support for the president, or they think that these raids are going to go over well. I'm not certain that Lehigh Valley residents care all that much, because like this isn't something that we see all that often around here.
This is one place I really don't know. I'm not that sure about how Lehigh Valley residents are reacting in comparison to kind of national reactions on this. I just don't have the polling right on the kind of the localized level to say that. As you said, there's some unique features about our population and our Hispanic and Latino population being primarily Puerto Rican, which has a different, perhaps, take on some of this given standing, citizenship standing. So I'm not sure. We'll see, right? This is part of the story is as this plays out across the country and where the raids are and how the local reactions. We've seen even in red states where there's been a raid on an area and a community, and there's a kind of a backlash because people have individuals that have lived in their community for a long time, and they start to think of it much more personally than they did in the past. So we'll see how that plays out in the Valley.
And speaking of those personal situations, we did have an ICE raid here in Bethlehem this month. A cleanup crew responding to a fire pretty much across the street from our studios made multiple arrests. That was followed by a raid. That was followed by a peaceful protest here. What is is that moving the needle at all? Is that driving this closer to home?
I think in the end it will, right? The example that you used here from the Valley and kind of the reaction to that on both on a fairly small, important scale, of course, but relatively small. As those events play out, and if they do become more common, it'll be interesting to see. The president seem to maybe modify his policy approach of where he wants certain targeted things to happen, to larger cities and places like that to be focused on. You wonder how a place like the Lehigh Valley fits into that broader focus of ICE and the president's mission. But if it was to become more common and more people feel it, and they feel it in their employment situation and they feel it in their neighbors, I would expect that reaction to become more intense and more personal.
I want to close on some perspective here. How far has the political needle moved since Trump signed the Laken-Riley Act in January? That law, which requires that people illegally in the country be deported automatically if they're charged with a serious crime, that drew bipartisan support back in January.
Yeah, think about that act. I mean, how do you really oppose that? You could find, details and say, well, maybe, this is applying too broadly. But it just as you framed it, Tom, it has enormous buy-in. But as often we talk about in politics, that's the low-hanging fruit. We talked last year about, well, how's this really going to play out? And it's not an easily solved issue. We're dealing with millions of individuals that are intertwined with every aspect of American life. No one, or almost no one's gonna be going to the mat for a criminal or someone that commits a violent act. There's just not going to be a constituency. How do you feel about the person that cleans your house, helps you get your food, helps you build your home, lives next to you for years and years, when they become the person that we're talking about extracting from the community? It's just a different scale, and that's the reality of what we're seeing play out in the U.S. right now. You get the low-hanging fruit early, and then you got to deal with the difficult problems.
That's Muhlenberg College political scientist Chris Borick. This has been Lehigh Valley Political Pulse. I'm Tom Shortell. For an extended version of this interview, visit LehighValleyNews.com.